The flashing red and blue lights lit up my driveway. An officer stepped out of the car, hand resting on his belt. And there she was, Karen, smiling like she had already won. She pointed at me, accusing me of trespassing. On the land I had worked for years to own. The neighbors gathered at the edge of their lawns, whispering, waiting to see me dragged away in handcuffs. But what none of them knew was that tonight, Karen had made a mistake she could never undo. Welcome back to HOA Unit, where suburban secrets turn into stories you'll never forget. My name is Daniel. I'm a single homeowner living in a quiet suburban neighborhood that looks perfect on the outside. But beneath the trimmed hedges and freshly painted fences lies a world of rules, power trips, and neighbors who will do anything to control you. This is where my story begins. The flashing red and blue lights still burned in my eyes. They painted the walls of my house red, blue, like a warning I could not escape. The officer's boots crunched on the gravel of my driveway, and Karen, my neighbor, my nightmare, stood there like a queen in front of her throne. She smiled at me, but her smile was poison. She whispered something to the officer and pointed her finger at me, like I was some criminal caught in the act. I stood frozen. How could this even be real? This was my land, my house, my property that I had worked years to pay for, and now I was being accused of trespassing on it. The officer's eyes moved from Karen to me. His hand stayed close to his belt, near the cold black shape of his gun. The neighbors had already gathered at the edge of the cul-de-sac. They stood in little groups, whispering like bees buzzing around a hive. I could hear pieces of their voices. Did he really? On his own property? Karen wouldn't lie. Their words cut me deeper than any blade. My chest felt tight. But I held my ground. I knew the truth, and I knew the papers in my house could prove it. But what good are papers when the whole world is already against you? Karen took a step forward. Her perfume was sharp, mixed with the sour smell of her victory. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "Officer, I told you, this man does not belong here." Her words hung in the air like smoke. The officer nodded slowly, and for a moment, I felt the ground tilt beneath me. Was he actually believing her? Was my entire life about to collapse because of a woman who lived 3 doors down? I raised my voice, steady but shaking inside. This is my property. My name is on the deed. I live here. The officer looked at me with suspicion, like I was the one lying. Karen crossed her arms, her smile growing wider. She had planned this every second of it. This was not about rules or fences or property lines anymore. This was war. The night air was heavy, thick with tension. Even the crickets had gone silent. The streetlights above flickered, like they too were nervous to watch what was happening. I remembered all the letters she had sent me before, little slips of paper tucked into my door, complaints about my grass, about my trash bins, about the way my dog barked when the mail came. Every rule was another chain she tried to wrap around my life. And now she had gone further than ever before, calling the cops, accusing me of trespassing on land I bought with my own sweat. I tried to read the officer's face, but his eyes gave nothing away. He wrote something in his little notepad, then turned to Karen. Her voice was smooth, sweet even, but every word was a dagger. He was climbing over the back fence. I saw it with my own eyes. He does not belong on this side. The crowd gasped. It was a lie, a bold lie. But in that moment, lies sounded louder than truth. My throat tightened, but I refused to bow down. "Officer, come inside with me. I'll show you my documents. Everything is in my name." Karen laughed. It was not a laugh of humor. It was the laugh of someone who thought they had already won. "Oh, please. Forged papers mean nothing. Anyone can print a piece of paper these days." Her words hit me like a hammer. She wasn't just questioning my presence. She was questioning my entire existence here, if she could convince them. If the neighbors believed her, I would be nothing. But a stranger in my own home, the officer looked at me one more time. The silence was so sharp I could hear my heartbeat. I knew this was the moment. The moment that would decide everything. The neighbors leaned forward, waiting, hungry for. Drama Karen tilted her head, her smile daring me to speak. But what could I say? Words felt weak against her lies. Truth felt small against her power. And yet, I could not stay silent. Not now. Not ever. I asked myself one question. If the system was already on her side, how far was I willing to go to protect what was mine? I clenched my fists, not in anger, but in resolve, because deep down, I knew this fight was only beginning. Karen thought she could destroy me with one phone call, but she had no idea who she was really dealing with. And so, I looked at the officer, and I looked at Karen, and I said, "You've made a mistake that's going to cost you more than you know." Her smile faltered, just for a second, just enough for me to see fear hiding behind her eyes, but the officer still stood between us, and the night was far from over. And now, let me ask you this. If your neighbor tried to get you arrested on your own property, would you fight back, or would you walk away? The night after Karen called the cops on me, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the empty street, waiting for the flashing lights to come back. Every sound made me tense. Every car that passed made me jump. I wasn't just angry. I was unsettled, because I realized something frightening. Karen wasn't done with me. This was only the beginning. The neighborhood looked peaceful in the morning, but it was a fake peace. The lawns were perfectly trimmed. The mailboxes stood in straight lines like soldiers. Children rode their bikes in circles, laughing as if nothing had happened, but I could feel it in the air. The weight of whispers, the way people looked at me and quickly looked away, the way conversations stopped when I walked by Karen had planted a seed. And now everyone doubted. May bought this house because I wanted quiet. I wanted a place where I could breathe after years of working long hours in the city. A ranch-style home at the edge of the cul-de-sac, with tall oak trees in the back and enough space for my dog to run free. I thought I was buying peace, but peace doesn't live in neighborhoods with people like Karen. She was the president of the HOA, not officially elected, but somehow always in charge. Her word was law, and if you didn't follow, she made your life miserable. I had heard stories when I moved in, stories about how she fined a man for painting his fence the wrong shade of white, how she forced a family to replace their mailbox because it was an inch too tall, how she reported a teenager for leaving his basketball hoop on the driveway overnight. At first, I thought these were exaggerations, neighborhood gossip, but now I knew. Every word was true. The first letter I got from the HOA seemed harmless. It said my trash bins were too visible from the street. I moved them, and another letter came, this time about the grass in my backyard being too uneven. I hired someone to cut it. Then another letter about the fence. I started to notice a pattern every week. A new complaint, and every complaint had one thing in common: Karen's signature at the bottom. It wasn't about the rules, it was about control. And now, she had taken her control to the extreme by calling the police on me. I walked down the street that morning. The air was heavy with silence. Neighbors watered their lawns, but didn't wave. Mothers pulled their kids closer as I passed. It felt like I was the villain in a movie I didn't sign up for. And at the center of it all, standing tall with her garden shears, was Karen. She looked up from her roses as I walked by. She smiled that same cold smile. "Good morning, neighbor." Her voice was sweet, but I could taste the venom underneath. I wanted to say something. I wanted to tell her she had gone too far, but the words stuck in my throat because I knew. If I said one wrong thing, she would twist it and use it against me. That's how people like her operated, and I wasn't going to hand her another weapon instead. I kept walking, but every step I took, I could feel her eyes on me, like a predator watching its prey later that day. Another letter showed up on my door. This time it was worse. It claimed that part of my backyard fence extended into community property. Community property that Karen insisted belonged to everyone. The same area she claimed I was trespassing on. The letter warned me that I could face fines, even legal action, if I didn't correct the violation. But I knew better. That land was mine. It was right there in the deed. Clear and simple. And yet, she had the entire neighborhood convinced it wasn't. He sat on my porch, holding the letter in my hand. My dog lay at my feet, his ears twitching every time someone passed. I could see Karen across the street. She stood with another neighbor, whispering, pointing in my direction. They both looked at me like I was some kind of intruder. It was surreal. I lived here, I paid for this home, and yet I was being treated like I didn't belong. That's when I made a decision. I wasn't going to let Karen push me out. I wasn't going to be her next victim. If she wanted a fight, she was going to get one. But fighting someone like Karen wasn't simple. She had power, influence, and a smile that convinced people to believe her lies. I needed more than just anger. I needed patience and proof. And a plan. So that night, I pulled out every document I had, the deed, the property survey, the HOA agreement I signed. When I moved in, I spread them across my kitchen table, studying every line, every word, looking for the truth that could cut through her lies. And as I sat there under the dim light, I realized something strange. The HOA agreement had been changed. Some of the clauses looked different from the copy I remembered signing, especially the parts about community property. The rules had shifted. But when and how, and most importantly, why, the more I read, the more I understood. This wasn't about property lines. This wasn't about fences. This was about power. Karen was rewriting the rules to control everything and everyone, and now she had chosen me as her biggest target. The papers shook in my hands, not from fear, but from realization. If Karen was willing to twist the rules, if she was willing to call the police on me, then what else was she willing to do? How far was she willing to go to make me look like the enemy in my own neighborhood? And now I want to ask you this. If you discovered your neighbor was secretly changing the rules to take control of your own, what would you do? Expose them, or play along until the right moment to strike? The morning of the first clash was colder than usual. Not the kind of cold that makes you shiver, but the kind of cold that makes the air heavy and the silence sharper. I woke up to a knock on my door. Not just one knock, but a series of hard, impatient bangs. When I opened it, Karen was standing there, her lips pressed tight, her eyes shining with something cruel. In her hand was another letter from the HOA. She didn't smile this time. She didn't need to. Her presence was enough. She held out the letter like a weapon. "You're in violation again," she said, her voice low but sharp. I took the paper without speaking, and as she turned to leave, she whispered just loud enough for me to hear, "People like you never last here." Her words stayed in my head long after she walked away. People like me. What did that even mean? I wasn't breaking rules. I wasn't disturbing anyone. I was just living my life, quietly, peacefully, on the land I had bought. But to her, that was a crime. The letter accused me of leaving construction materials in plain view, a violation of HOA code number something. But I hadn't left anything out. The wood and nails by my fence were from the repair I was doing. They weren't trash. They weren't permanent. They were part of fixing what she had complained about last week. I realized then This wasn't about rules at all. It was about breaking me down. One complaint at a time, and the more I thought about it, the more I saw her pattern. She would create the problem, then punish me for solving it. It was like a game to her end. The only rule was that I could never went to the backyard to check the fence. The boards were stacked neatly against the side, nothing messy, nothing out of order, but from the right angle. If you stood on Karen's property, you could snap a photo that made it look like a pile of junk, and I knew, without a doubt, that's exactly what she had done that night. I heard her voice. Drifting through the quiet street, she was talking to another neighbor, loudly enough for me to catch every word. Some people just don't respect the community, she said. They think they're above the rules. I could hear the neighbor murmur in agreement. I stood at my window, watching her silhouette under the streetlight. She wasn't just trying to control me. She was poisoning everyone against me the next morning. Things escalated. I woke up to find my mailbox covered with sticky notes, dozens of them, in bright colors, all with the same word written in Karen's neat handwriting: trespasser. My stomach dropped as I pulled them off one by one. The neighbors walking their dogs slowed down, stared, whispered. It was humiliating. It was Wari decided I couldn't stay silent anymore. So when I saw her trimming her roses that afternoon, I walked across the street. My heart was pounding, my palms were sweating, but my voice was steady. "Karen," I said. She looked up, her scissors glinting in the sun. "Yes, neighbor." I held up the crumpled sticky notes. "This stops now?" Her smile returned, slow and mocking. "Oh, did someone leave those for you?" She tilted her head like an innocent child. "You know, if you just followed the rules, no one would feel the need to remind you." Her words were honey mixed with poison. I wanted to shout, to expose her right there, but I saw the curtains move in the house across the street. Someone was watching. Maybe everyone was watching, and Karen knew it. She leaned closer. Her perfume stung my nose. "I can make your life very easy here," she whispered. "Or I can make it impossible." She clipped another rose. The sound of the scissors sharp in the air. The petals fell to the ground like drops of blood. I stepped back, not because I was afraid of her, but because I finally understood what I was dealing with. Karen wasn't just petty. She wasn't just controlling. She was dangerous, and she was willing to destroy me, just to prove she could that night. I sat in my living room with the lights off, watching her house from my window. Her curtains were open, her lights bright, her laughter spilling out into the street as she entertained guests to them. She was charming, generous, the perfect neighbor. But to me, she was the shadow that never left. I couldn't fight her head on. Not yet, but I wasn't going to let her win either. I started keeping every letter, every note, every scrap of evidence. If she wanted war, I would give her war, but on my terms still. The question burned in my mind. How far was she willing to go? She had already called the police once. She had already turned the neighborhood against me. What would she do next? I stared at the stack of letters on my table, the growing pile of lies and threats, and I asked myself the only question that mattered: if she was willing to destroy me over roses and fences, what would she do if I finally fought back? And now I want to ask you, if you had a neighbor who made it their mission to ruin your life, would you confront them directly? Or would you wait in silence and gather proof until the right moment came? It happened on a Sunday afternoon. The sun was high, the air was thick. The street was quiet. I was in my backyard, repairing the old wooden gate that led to the side of my property. My dog lay in the shade, watching me with half-open eyes. The world felt calm for the first time in weeks, but peace never lasts long when Karen is your neighbor. I heard the crunch of gravel, the slow, deliberate sound of footsteps approaching. I turned, and there she was, Karen stood just beyond the fence line, her phone already in her hand. Her expression was sharp, her lips pulled tight like she had rehearsed this moment. "You're not supposed to be there," she said. I stared at her in disbelief. "This is my backyard," I said. "My fence. My land. My gate." She tilted her head. "Not according to the HOA agreement." Her voice was calm, almost smug. "That strip of land belongs to the community now, and you're trespassing." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because the absurdity was too much to swallow. "Karen, I own this land," I said. "I have the deed. I have the survey. You can't just decide it's community property." But she wasn't listening. Her fingers danced across her phone. Screen. Quick and certain. Then she held it to her ear. "Yes. I'd like to report a trespasser." My chest tightened. It was happening again. She was calling the cops on me. For standing in my own backyard, I tried to reason with her. "Karen, stop. This. You're making a mistake." But she turned her back on me. Her voice was soft and sweet as she spoke into the phone. "Yes, officer. He's here right now, yes. I feel unsafe." Unsafe, that word hit me like a knife. She wasn't just accusing me of trespassing. She was painting me as a threat. By the time the officer arrived, a small crowd had gathered. Neighbors leaned against their fences. Some stood with their arms crossed. Others whispered behind their hands, all of them staring at me. I felt like an animal in a cage. On display for their entertainment, the officer stepped into my yard. Karen was right behind him, her eyes shining with triumph. "There he is," she said. "I told you. He refuses to leave." I forced myself to stay calm. "Officer, this is my property," I said. "I have papers inside. I can show you." But Karen cut me off. "Don't listen to him," she said quickly. "He showed me fake documents last time. Printed them off the internet. They're not real." Her words spread through the crowd like wildfire. "Fake documents." The neighbors' eyes hardened. I could almost hear their judgment in the silence. The officer frowned. "Do you have proof right now?" he asked. I pointed to my house. "Yes, inside?" "Let me get it." But Karen stepped forward. Her voice cracked with fake emotion. "Officer, please, don't let him go inside. I don't feel safe with him moving around like that." She clutched her chest, like I was some monster lurking. In my own home, the officer hesitated for a terrifying second. I thought he believed her. I thought he was going to put me in handcuffs. Right there in front of everyone. My blood turned cold, but finally, he nodded. "All right," he said. "Get your documents. But do it slowly." I walked into my house with the weight of the entire neighborhood pressing down on me. My hands shook as I pulled the deed from the drawer. I wanted to scream, to shout, to make them all see the truth. But all I could do was walk back out. Holding the papers like a shield, I handed them to the officer. He read them carefully, his eyes moving line by line. Karen stood close, peering over his shoulder, waiting for a chance to strike. But as the seconds stretched, her smile began to fade. The officer looked at me, then back at her. "These documents look valid," he said. "They show clear ownership of this land." Karen's face tightened, but she recovered quickly. "They're forged," she snapped. "I told you, he's dangerous. He doesn't belong here." Her voice rose higher and higher. The crowd shifted uneasily for the first time. I saw doubt flicker in their eyes. Not doubt about me, doubt about her. The officer handed back my papers. "Ma'am," he said firmly, "unless you have evidence of forgery, this man is within his rights." Karen's mouth opened, then closed. Her cheeks burned red. Her plan had failed, but I knew, deep down, this wasn't over, because Karen wasn't the kind of person who stopped after losing once. She was the kind who came back harder, nastier, more dangerous as the officer left, and the neighbors drifted away. Karen stayed for a moment longer. She leaned close to me, her voice barely above a whisper. "This isn't finished," she said, and then she walked away. I stood there, my papers clutched in my hand, my heart pounding. The question burned in my mind like fire. How far was Karen willing to go? To take from me what was already mine? And now I want to ask you this. If your neighbor accused you of being dangerous and tried to twist the police against you, how would you fight back? With silence and patience, or with fire and confrontation? Morning after the police left, I thought maybe things would cool down. Maybe Karen had embarrassed herself enough to back off. But I was wrong. When I opened my mailbox that day, I found not one, not two, but 5 envelopes, each stamped. With the bold letters of the HOA, I carried them inside. My stomach already tight, my hands shook as I tore them open one by one. Each letter was worse than the first. Said I was in violation for unsightly construction materials. The second claimed my dog barked too loudly at night. The third accused me of failing to maintain uniform lawn standards. The fourth fined me for leaving my trash bins visible for too long. And the fifth was the worst. It claimed I owed hundreds of dollars in unpaid fines, and if I didn't pay, the HOA had the right to put a lien on my property. Lien, that single word made my blood run cold. It meant they could take my home. The place I worked years to afford. The place I poured my savings into. The place Karen wanted to rip from my hands. I sat at the table staring at the stack of letters. The words blurred as my anger boiled. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was war on paper, war through rules and fines and signatures. Karen was using the HOA like her personal weapon, and everyone else was too afraid or too blind to stop her that evening. I saw her walking past my house. She held her head high, her steps slow and confident, like a queen inspecting her territory. She glanced at me sitting on the porch and smiled, not a friendly smile, a smile that said, "Checkmate." I wanted to shout at her. I wanted to throw the letters in her face. But I stayed quiet because anger wouldn't save me now. Only strategy would. I started keeping a binder, every letter, every sticky note, every piece of paper she threw at me. I saved it. I organized it by date, by accusation, by the ridiculous rule she claimed. I broke. My binder grew thicker each day. A physical record of her obsession. If she wanted to fight with rules, I would fight back with evidence, but evidence alone wasn't enough, because the HOA board, every single one of them, bent to Karen's will. I saw it with my own eyes at the next community meeting. I walked into the clubhouse that night. Dozens of neighbors sat in neat rows, their voices low, their eyes flicking toward me. At the front table sat the board members, 5 of them, all wearing polite smiles, and in the center seat was Karen. Her smile was wider than ever. She tapped her pen against the table as she watched me walk in, as if she was already writing my sentence. Meeting started with small things, complaints about mailbox heights, about grass being too long, about children playing too loudly in the street. It all sounded so ridiculous. But no one laughed. Not here. Not under Karen's watch. Then she cleared her throat. "Next item on the agenda," she said. "The repeated violations of our neighbor, Daniel." All eyes turned to me. My chest tightened. Karen read from her stack of papers like a prosecutor in court. Failure to comply with lawn standards, violation of trash bin rules, trespassing on community land, repeated disruptive behavior. Each word felt like a nail being hammered into my coffin. The neighbors nodded, some frowned, some whispered, and the board members sat in silence, letting her speak as if her word was law. When she finished, she smiled sweetly. "I move that the HOA issue an immediate fine and take steps toward a lien if compliance is not achieved. The board nodded without question. Not one of them asked me for my side. Not one of them asked to see my documents. It was as if I didn't exist. At alley stood, my voice shook, but I forced it to rise. I own my land. I said, I have proof. I have every document, every survey. This is harassment. But Karen just tilted her head. Her voice dripped with false pity. Neighbors, listen to him, always playing the victim, always blaming others, but never taking responsibility. The crowd murmured in agreement, and for the first time, I felt something worse than anger. I felt isolation, like I was standing alone in a storm while everyone else huddled under an umbrella she was holding. I left the meeting before it ended. The whispers followed me out the door. Whispers of judgment, whispers of suspicion. Karen had won another round, but as I walked home under the cold street lights, I made myself a promise. She would not win the war, because if Karen wanted to play dirty, I was ready to get my hands dirty too, not with lies, not with power trips, but with something far stronger, truth and patience, and the knowledge that even the strongest masks eventually crack that night. I placed the binder on my desk. I stared at the thick stack of evidence, and I smiled for the first time in weeks, because no matter how hard Karen tried to bury me, I was going to dig my way out, and when the time came, I would bury her instead. And now I want to ask you this. If your entire neighborhood turned against you because of one powerful neighbor, would you stay and fight until the end? Or would you walk away and leave it all behind? I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Karen's smirk. I saw her whispering to the board, twisting the rules like vines around my throat. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized something. If Karen could dig into my life, maybe I could dig into hers the next morning. I started asking questions, not loud ones, not public ones, quiet questions, conversations at the coffee shop, small talk at the grocery store, chance meetings on morning walks at first. Most neighbors shrugged me off. They were afraid to talk, afraid of what would happen if Karen found out. But then, little by little, pieces of truth slipped through the cracks. One man told me she had lived in 3 neighborhoods before ours, and in each one, she left under bad circumstances. Another whispered that Karen's husband didn't really work overseas, like she claimed. Someone else hinted that her house was paid off in a strange way, not through a normal bank loan, but something no one quite understood. The puzzle pieces were messy, but they painted a picture that didn't match the perfect queen Karen tried to be. Then came the biggest clue. One evening, as I was walking my dog past her house, I noticed something strange. Her curtains were open just enough for me to see inside. Stacks of papers covered her dining table, letters, envelopes, all with different names on them. I slowed my steps, squinting, and then I saw a letter with the HOAS letterhead, but the name at the top wasn't mine, and the fine amount was blank. It wasn't an official letter. It was a template. Karen had been making them herself. My chest tightened. Was it possible? Was Karen forging violations? Creating her own fake notices to scare people into compliance? I wanted to storm in right there, confront her, tear down the curtain she lived behind. But I knew better. If I acted too soon, she'd twist it against me. I needed proof, solid, undeniable proof, so I started watching every night. Lights on in her dining room, papers spread across the table every morning, neighbors receiving new letters in their mailboxes, and always Karen smiling at them like a benevolent queen, handing down justice. It was her empire, built not on rules, but on fear. I kept documenting photos from the sidewalk, notes on dates and times, copies of every letter I received. The binder grew heavier, but so did my resolve. One day, As I flipped through the growing collection, I noticed something chilling. His signatures on the letters, they didn't match. Some looked sharp and clean. Others sloppy and rushed. It was clear now. She wasn't just writing the letters. She was signing for other board members too. Forgery. Fraud. An entire neighborhood trapped under the weight of papers that weren't even really. Wanted to laugh. I wanted to cry. Mostly, I wanted to show everyone what she really was. But timing mattered. If I revealed too soon, she'd spin it as another attack against her. If I waited too long, she might actually steal my home. So I made a choice. I would bide my time. I would let her dig her own hole deeper until she couldn't climb out, and that moment came sooner than I expected at the next board meeting. She stood up with her usual power. Her stack of papers was thicker than ever. She began her performance, waving the letters around like weapons. She declared that I was in violation again, that I had missed payments, that the lien process was already underway. Her voice rose with every sentence, sharper, louder. But something strange happened this time. The crowd didn't nod. They shifted in their seats. They whispered to one another. A man in the back frowned and muttered. Didn't she say that same thing last month? Karen didn't notice. She was too caught up in her show, too confident, too blind to see that the mask was slipping, and for the first time, I smiled because I knew the truth was on my side, and the truth has a way of shining through cracks, no matter how hard someone tries to cover. I left the meeting with a lighter step than I'd had in weeks. The war wasn't over. Not yet, but the battlefield was shifting. Karen's power wasn't as solid as it seemed, and I was ready to strike when the moment came. And now I want to ask you this. If you discovered that your enemy was secretly faking everything, would you expose them right away? Or would you wait and let them trap themselves deeper first? The night of the final meeting, the air felt different. Neighbors didn't smile at Karen the same way anymore. They nodded politely, but their eyes darted away quickly, like they were starting to question her throne. I walked into the clubhouse, carrying one thing, my binder, thick, heavy, overflowing with every letter she had ever sent, real ones, fake ones, and everything in between. Karen sat at the center table, like always. Her stack of papers was taller than usual. She tapped them against the desk, smiling her sharp smile, like a predator about to feed the meeting. Began with the usual chatter: mailbox paint, lawn measurements, trash bins. Then her eyes locked on me. Next order of business, she said, the continuing violations of Daniel, our most disruptive neighbor. Gasps, whispers, all eyes on me again. But this time, I didn't flinch. She waved her papers in the air. He has failed to pay fines, ignored repeated notices, and disrupted our peaceful community. Her voice rose higher with every word. Her cheeks flushed with the thrill of control when she finally slammed the papers down. She smiled wide. I moved to authorize foreclosure proceedings immediately. Board froze. Some shifted in their chairs. One of them cleared his throat, as if unsure, and that's when I stood calm, steady, my binder in hand. Before you vote, I said, maybe you should see this. I opened the binder slowly, deliberately, pages filled with copies of letters, notes, photos. I laid them out on the table, one by one. The same templates Karen had used, the same letters with mismatched signatures, the same threats recycled over and over. The room went silent. Karen's smile faltered for the first time. These letters, I said, don't match your records. Do they? I flipped another page. Some of these signatures aren't even real. I flipped again. Neighbors have been receiving notices that don't exist in your official files. Looked at the board, then at the crowd, then back at Karen. Her face was pale now, her lips pressed tight. Her fingers tapped the desk. Fast and nervous. One board member leaned forward, frowning. Karen, is this true? she stammered. She laughed nervously. She tried to twist her words, but the whispers in. The crowd grew louder suspicion, spreading like wildfire finally. One brave neighbor stood an older man with shaky hands. "I got one of those letters too," he said. "I paid money I didn't owe." Another voice rose, "Me too." Then another and another, dozens of voices, now all spilling the same truth, Karen's. Empire was crumbling before her eyes. Her mask shattered in real time. Her kingdom of fear collapsing under the weight of her own lies. She slammed her fist on the table. "This is nonsense," she screamed. "Lies. You're all turning against me because of him." But no one believed her anymore. The board members exchanged uneasy glances. One of them stood and cleared his throat. "Effective immediately. Karen is removed from her position on this board." Gasps filled the room. Karen's face twisted. Red with rage, she tried to argue. She tried to shout, but the gavel came down, and with it, her reign was over. I stood there in the silence that followed relief, washing through me like a flood. For the first time in months, I could breathe. The neighbors looked at me differently. Now, not with suspicion, but with quiet respect. Some even nodded. Some even smiled. I walked out of that clubhouse into the cool night air. The stars above felt brighter, the streets quieter. Weight on my chest finally lifted. Karen never showed her face at another meeting. Some say she packed up in the middle of the night. Others whispered that she moved to another town, another neighborhood, to start her little empire again. I didn't care. She was gone from here, and that was enough. Back at home, I placed the binder on my shelf, a reminder of the battle I fought, and the storm I survived, and maybe, just maybe, a warning for the next time someone tries to play queen over a kingdom that isn't theirs. I sat on my porch that night, watching the still streets of the neighborhood peaceful at last, and I thought to myself, sometimes the greatest battles aren't fought with fists or guns. They're fought with patience, with truth, and with the courage to stand your ground even when everyone else is too afraid to move. And now I want to ask you this. If you had the power to completely ruin someone who tried to destroy your life, would you take revenge to the very end? Or would you walk away once justice was served?